I'm very much of the view that the debate that has happened over many years, is the United States directing Israel or is Israel directing the United States? This is a debate we should stop having. The fact is, the United States and Israel are one country when it comes to the Palestinians. They operate hand in glove. If you start thinking that they are not hand in glove, you will get confused. When Joe Biden would say, well, we're trying to tell them to have a ceasefire, but meanwhile he's shipping 2,000-pound bombs, what he's saying is merely to confuse the world. In fact, they weren't trying to get Israel to have a ceasefire. There's no evidence of that. Blinken will travel to Tel Aviv 10 times during the conflict. But okay, when the Ansar Allah government in Yemen said that, look, we cannot any longer tolerate weapons going through the Red Sea and going to help Israel kill more Palestinians, we're going to stop that. United States government didn't bother with any diplomacy. They didn't send Blinken to Sana'a to go and talk to the Ansar Allah leadership. There was no diplomatic overture. They just threatened the Yemenis and then they bombed them. So look, in that sense, the United States was bombing Yemen on behalf of Israel.
Welcome back, everybody. Vijay Prashad, a historian and an author of over 40 books, doesn't mince words here, but approaches this podcast with mere facts. The topic that's undeniable as it is controversial, the breakdown bond between the US and Israel. This isn't just a partnership, it's a symbiosis. The so-called debate over whether the US directs Israel or vice versa is a distraction from the harsh reality. When it comes to the Palestinians, these two nations operate as one. Think about it. Biden publicly calls for a ceasefire while sending bombs. Blinken's endless shuttle diplomacy to Tel Aviv and the US bombing Yemen on Israel's behalf. All of it screams coordination, not divergence. These actions reflect a broader global alliance, with Berlin, London, and Washington arming and enabling Tel Aviv, viewing the geopolitical south, or the global south, as expandable in their pursuit of world dominance. Stick around as we unravel how violent, not diplomacy, has become the default modus operandi for this bloc, and why the cost is always borne by those on the margins of the so-called international division of humanity. Get ready for some hard truths and sharper analysis. Let's get into it.
Where is the space between these countries? So we generally think of this global north as a pact, as a bloc. Germany, with the United States, supplied almost 100% of Israel's weapons. United States about 80%, Germany close to 20%. These are hand in glove. Britain provided a small percent, but still very sophisticated equipment to the Israelis. They are hand in glove. I don't imagine that it's useful to continue the debate and discussion whether there's any difference between Berlin, London, Washington, and Tel Aviv. I think they are part of a bloc which we call the global north, and they treat those who are on the other side of the international division of humanity without any care for their life, for decency. There's no care and concern at all.
That actually explains the situation very well. But my question to you, why is Israel so special to the West? And the West doesn't only support Israel militarily, but also diplomatically, with media. It is very much part of the West, part of the North, of the global North. Why is that so? What is so special about Israel?
I would like us first to go to something a little absurd. Just the other day, an Israeli football team was playing a match in Amsterdam where their supporters arrived in the city and ran riot, tearing down Palestinian flags, chanting offensive, racist things, and then instigating a fight against the supporters of Ajax, the team that was there. What was an Israeli team doing playing in Amsterdam? Well, Israel plays in the European League. But by the way, for people who don't know this, Israel is in fact in Asia, is not in Europe. Secondly, Israel participates in Eurovision. Israel is part of Asia, it's not part of Europe. But the Europeans see Israel as a garrison, a European or a white garrison that is out there almost like an aircraft carrier in the Arab lands. They see Israel as part of them. And I'm saying this now with an understanding of the kind of racial or racist metaphysics that colonial ideology produces. Israel is Europe in Asia. There are so many quotations to this effect made by Israeli leaders saying that, we are a European civilization, we are a European bastion surrounded by Arabs. These are all racist formulations. To call Israel a European part of European civilization is absolutely ridiculous. What does that mean? Is it or is it not part of Asia? If it's part of Asia, it's not part of Europe. But they don't mean this geographically. The reason Israel is part of Europe is the same way Australia is part of Europe. Australia also participates in Eurovision. This is a racist metaphysics. These are white countries. And I don't think this should be underemphasized. They support Israel because it's a white country fighting against people that they think of as dangerous barbarians. And I know I said this before about the International Division of Humanity, but I really feel like this gets underplayed and underspoken about in the analysis of the genocide against the Palestinians, that there is an enormous attitude of racialist white supremacy that operates here, and a kind of assumption in European and North American countries that somehow the whites of Israel have to be defended against the browns of the Palestinians. And that repulses me, that is what gives license to Israel to slaughter tens of thousands of people, including tens of thousands of children.
If I may, Israel's global position is built on the glaring double standards that highlight the hypocrisy of Western support. Despite being geographically in Asia, Israel is treated as a part of Europe, from football leagues to Eurovisions, reinforcing its identity as a Europe outpost in the Middle East. This alignment isn't about geography, it's rooted in a colonial, imperialistic, racialized narrative that frames Israel as a civilized white bastion against the barbaric Palestinians. This racist ideology grants Israel unchecked impunity to commit atrocities shielded by Western military, diplomatics, and media support. These actions exposed a disturbing truth. The West's allegiance to Israel isn't about democracy or shaped values, but about preserving a racial hierarchy disguised as policy.
In your report titled Hyper Imperialism, a Dangerous, Decadent, and New Stage, there's a quote that I would like to read. You say, "It is not a matter of exaggerations to say that the global north has declared a state of open hostility and war on any section of the global south that does not comply with the policies of the global north." What do you mean by this hostility and war on the global south? And where do you see Palestine fits into this?
So to make the point, let's go to Cuba for a minute.
Yeah.
I just published a book with Noam Chomsky called On Cuba.
Yeah.
In the book, we make the point that the reason the United States is obsessed with this small island with only 11 million people, less than the people in New York City, the reason the United States is so obsessed is that the Cuban Revolution has been defiant. That's a word that the US State Department uses. It's Castro's defiance that they don't like. That's how they say it. And they are worried that that defiance will become contagious. So therefore, that defiance has to be destroyed. And the way to destroy it is to do a blockade against Cuba for now almost 70 years. Palestine is actually right in this storyline. It's very interesting because you could make the argument that when the Palestinian leadership, which had been quite isolated in North Africa, having been removed from Beirut after the Israelis invaded Lebanon in 1982, the PLO had to leave, go to North Africa, were very detached from the Palestinian, occupied Palestinian territory. When the first Intifada happens in 87, the PLO was really not able to understand what was going on. Their links were not as tight and so on. At the time, they go towards the agreement, which we then know as the Oslo Agreements, 1994. Well, you would have thought that after 1994, after what Edward Said called the Versailles of the Palestinians, a kind of surrender, that the Israelis and the global north would have said, well, there's no more defiance. The defiance has ended. And in fact, it is to some extent true that there was a little truce, that the PA was allowed to establish itself, particularly in the West Bank, not really in East Jerusalem, which the Israelis were convinced they would annex at some point. They had land on it, built universities, and so on. And Gaza was also a kind of expectation that maybe they could settle things there. Remember, they had settlements and so on in Gaza. What happens subsequent to that is that there were enough factions of the Palestinian resistance movement that did not accept Oslo. Some of these were of the left, but there were also groups like Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and so on that rejected Oslo. And it's their defiance that makes this idea of Hamas so central to the imagination of the West. Subsequent to the Hamas winning the Legislative Assembly elections 2005, that's when the bombing start of Gaza. It's to actually snuff out defiance by Hamas. They defied not only Oslo, but they defied the global north. Now, this doesn't mean that it's about Hamas. It's about defiance. And it's so interesting that the West linked Hamas to Iran very early on. Regardless of the West's stereotypical attitude to the Middle East, where they say, well, Shias and Sunnis don't get along. I mean, Hamas had nothing to do with Shiism. It comes out of the Muslim Brotherhood tradition. It was largely getting financing from Qatar and Turkey. There was really not much Iranian influence at all on Hamas. But the United States put together all the elements of defiance in the Middle East. Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran, all in one place. And all that defiance had to be killed off. Later, when Ansar Allah comes in, they say again it's an Iranian proxy. I mean, now Mr. Netanyahu is conducting what I think of is an act of gaslighting. He wants, and he's been trying desperately, to turn the genocide against the Palestinians into a war against Iran. He wants everybody to think that what the Israelis are doing is not murdering Palestinians, but protecting the West from a defiant Iran. That's his gaslighting. That was, I think, the reason why they go to Iran to kill a Hamas leader. They go and murder Syed Hassan Nasrallah, who was, in fact, one of the most beloved leaders in the Arab world for the fact that he had resisted against the Israeli occupation of Lebanon, a legal resistance, and had defeated the Israelis. In fact, twice. Once by forcing the Israelis to leave Lebanon in 2000, and secondly, by not being defeated by the Israeli war of 2006. The murder of Nasrallah, the killing of a number of Iranian generals to try to provoke Iran into a war. And Iran has been extraordinarily disciplined, knowing that entering into this conflict actually benefits Benjamin Netanyahu because the United States will come and clobber Iran. So, this idea of defiance, which is why they want to say, look, we have nothing against the Palestinians. We just want to erase Hamas. But in fact, here's the crazy thing. If you just want to take out Hamas, why are you bombing civilian buildings at night? Because then you're killing entire Palestinian families. If you just want to go after Hamas, stop the aerial bombardment. Send in your military. Fight house to house to get to the Hamas people.
Why do you think they kill Palestinian civilians, entire families?
Well,
What is
because,
the justification behind this logic?
that is, I think, something I've already mentioned, but I think it's worthwhile putting it together. I think they are focusing ideologically that they want to eradicate Hamas because this is the logic of getting rid of defiance. That's what Israel is telling the West, because the West cannot tolerate defiance. The attack on Cuba is similar to the attack on Hamas along those lines. Don't permit defiance because defiance can be contagious. That's what they're telling the West. But what, in fact, the Israelis are doing is pretty straightforward. They want to clear out Palestinians from Gaza. Look, I've said for a long time, for over 10 years, that Israel will never permit a one-state solution. A one-state solution goes right up against the Israeli idea of the Zionist state. They know that if in 10 years the Palestinian population increases above the Israeli Jewish population, that the idea that Israel is a Jewish state is going to not work. They'd have to accept a binational, plurinational, in fact, because there will be Armenians and a whole other bunch of peoples. It would be a plurinational state if it's a one state. That is unacceptable to the Zionist hardcore leadership. A two-state solution is largely impossible because the settlements in the West Bank have eaten the territory. East Jerusalem is almost completely annexed, and they are now emptying Gaza. What the Israelis want, in fact, is a three-state solution. That's what they are going for. And the three-state solution is Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt. They want to push the Palestinians out into these territories. That's their goal. And they are trying to do it in Gaza in a really systematic way, pushing everybody to Rafah and then, pushing them along, and let's see how long Sisi can hold out. And by the way, this is an interesting point. How long Sisi can hold out? It is a message to General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to go back and read the record of Egyptian history from 1948 to 1952. In 1948, during the Nakba, the Egyptians tried to do something to help, very moderate intervention to help the Palestinians. But then they just sat there. And, King Farouk had bought all this equipment from the British. They didn't use it in the war. They just sat on it. There were radical low-level officers in the Egyptian army who began to meet. And they were frustrated and angry that their Palestinian neighbors were not being protected. And it was this group that then overthrew King Farouk and came to power, led by Gamal Abdel Nasser. Nasser's coup in 1952 is directly related to Egypt not doing anything to help the Palestinians. General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, now president, has just sat on his hands. He has not permitted anything. He's not even permitted. I mean, look, Egypt has bought the best of American aircraft. Why didn't they just fly their aircraft across Gaza and establish a no-fly zone? 3 or 4 hours a day, fly aircraft, saying we're not going to permit. They did nothing. What is happening in the mid-rank air force of the Egyptian, armed forces? Are people? Where is the next Nasser? I mean, I don't want to suggest anything, but I mean, for God's sake, the Palestinians pushed up against the Rafah border, nowhere to go, no safe zone, and Egypt didn't just send the tanks to smash the gates and go in and establish a safe zone. Why didn't the Egyptian military enter Rafah and say you can't bomb Rafah? They did nothing. And in the middle of all this, for all their brave talk in the Gulf Arab states, the Emirate of Qatar decides Hamas has to leave. I mean, is this really the time to buckle under US pressure? It's quite disgraceful, actually. I'm just saying it very directly. But it is quite disgraceful that given that the Israelis have demonstrated that they want to push the Palestinians into Egypt, into Lebanon, into Jordan, these countries are doing nothing to assist the Palestinians and even to prevent. You see, why is Sisi not opening the gates, even just temporarily? I'm not saying Palestinians want to flee the land,
Well,
because
he's saying that because if he opened the gates, then the Palestinians will leave to Egypt, and that would be the end of Gaza, the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians.
but he's saying it as if he's protecting Gaza. But in fact, he doesn't want the Palestinians to come to Sinai, to occupy the Sinai Peninsula. That's not something that they want to see either.
No, of course not.
Yeah, so, whatever he's saying is not true. In fact, that's why I'm saying that the Egyptian army could have entered. Because if Egypt had entered that conflict, sent in the tanks up to, say, Khan Yunis, and said, we want to establish a safe zone, it could have been a point of negotiation with the Israelis. Even if Egypt and Jordan had threatened to tear up the two peace agreements, I'm not saying even tear it up. Egypt's peace agreement goes to 78, Jordan's to 94. Just threatened to tear them up. And then let's see the reaction from Tel Aviv. They didn't even put that on the table. So, in my opinion, you said, why are the Israelis bombing civilian targets, killing people, because they want to remove all the Palestinians. They want to claim the whole territory. This has now become a completely open agenda by the Israelis.
I think it's very open. It's very clear since the beginning of the war, since they started compelling people to leave from the north to the south and so on. So it was clear that they want to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians.
I think it was most definitely clear as day. Vijay Prashad's analysis dismantles Israel's narrative by exposing its intent to systematically eliminate Palestinian resistance under the guise of targeting Hamas. His comparison to Cuba highlights a broader pattern of punishing defiance against the global North's hegemony. Prashad argued that Israel's actions bombing civilians, ethnic cleansing, and forcing Palestinians into exiles aren't about security, but about erasing defiance to ensure a Zionist ethno-state. The complicity of regional players like Egypt and Jordan, who failed to intervene despite clear provocations, underscore the grim reality of geopolitical calculations over humanity. This isn't just a war on Gaza. It's a calculated move to erase an entire population and their right to exist. It's a piercing look into the dark mechanics of Israel's agenda. The complicity of regional powers and the broader global stakes are at play. Mr. Vijay pulls no punches in exposing the colonial arrogance and strategic maneuvers that aim to silence defiance and erase entire population of people. As always, we're here to cut through the noise and reveal the truth that the mainstream media won't touch. If you found value in this analysis, hit the like button, share your thoughts, and comment down below. And don't forget to subscribe. Together, let's keep uncovering the stories that silence us, that enslaves us. Until next time.